Okay, so this video begins our week's discussion in Come Follow Me, sections 51 through 57 of the Doctrine and Covenants. And the Doctrine and Covenants, the sections in this Come Follow Me cover a lot of ground. And the best way to address this video is to focus on a few ideas. Section 52 is where I'd like to turn our attention. And Section 52 was given to the elders of the church during a summer conference held in Kirtland, Ohio. And many of the members gathered on June 5th outside on a hill. And the Lord provided some important revelations. And I think the revelations the Lord provided are particularly helpful for us. And so let's explore one of the principles that the Lord reveals and then apply that to our lives. So, one of the questions that is answered in section 52 is who is accepted by God? This is an important question because I think deep down we all want to know that God accepts us. We want to know that we are doing things that are pleasing in His sight. That is often one of the ways that people's faith fails them, is they believe that God is on their side, but then the trials happen and God doesn't come through, or their belief in and hope in God's acceptance of them starts to wane and their faith crumbles. And a lot of times, or you could say that sometimes it's founded in that sense that people think they are favored of God and then they find out they're not. And that can be very discouraging. So that's kind of the ultimate question here is what makes us accepted of God? Is it simply being baptized at the age of 8 and having hands laid on our heads, having a church calling, the material wealth we have, our position in the church, a leadership role? Is that what makes us accepted of God? Or is there something else? So the Lord, speaking to the elders, tells them in verse 14, He says, "And again I will give unto you a pattern in all things, that ye may not be deceived." So that's where I want to focus on right now, is this idea of a pattern. And the Lord is giving this pattern so ye, the elders, will not be deceived. So this is particularly directed at the elders, but nevertheless, it still is instructive for us. So the meaning of pattern here isn't like a pattern in terms of a series of repetitions or a series of, I guess, repeated shapes, or like, a pattern on a quilt or something like that. But the term pattern in this case, it serves as a model. And it means a model for imitation. And we could even break this down further by defining the term model, and model refers to a standard. And so essentially what the Lord is saying in verse 14 is He says, "I will give unto you elders a standard for," well, sorry for the typo, but for how you should measure all things, so that you do not believe falsehoods. So what the Lord is doing here is He's saying, I'm going to give you this model, this standard, this guide, so that you can avoid deception. And this is quite important because we have seen already that the church has succumbed to some deception from Satan, from the adversary, and the Lord has given some principles on how to avoid deception, and now He's doing it again. And this time, the focus is on who we can follow, or on identifying who is accepted of God. And so He's giving this pattern to the elders so they can know who are true messengers of God, who are people who are accepted by God, and how to do that. And so what is this pattern? Well, let's focus again on verse 14. Well, this couplet, I guess, and then focus on verse 15 in that couplet where he says that, "Wherefore he that prayeth, whose spirit is contrite, the same is accepted of me if he obey mine ordinances." So the standard the Lord has laid out is like a 3-element standard, you could say. It says, those who pray, whose spirit is contrite, and obeys the Lord's commandments. And I've broken that down and put that kind of in my own words. I know they say there is ordinances, but another meaning for ordinances this time would have been commandments. And given that we didn't have the temple restored at this time, we don't really have temple ordinances. There aren't, as my understanding, I could be wrong, any real, I mean, there are the, baptism and things like that. And that could be what he means by ordinances for those who are baptized. But he does, again, tie that to other things as well. But I think that the Lord is sending me more broadly to commandments. So that's why I use that. Because ordinances doesn't, I know in the church today, we use the term ordinance very strictly in a limited sense to refer to rituals, but that is not necessarily how that term was used in the Doctrine and Covenants. But in any case, so that's the standard he lays out. So this is interesting. Let's kind of explore this. So we're talking about prayer first. So in order to be accepted of God, we have to pray. Well, why would prayer matter? Well, the ultimate purpose of prayer is to connect with God. And why do we need to connect with God? Well, so we can receive revelation from him. So we'll come back to that, but we first need to be able to be connected with God. So it's not just simply prayer as, although it says prayer, the Lord is likely referring to prayer where we are connecting with God. The next is whose spirit is contrite. And contrite is more than just meaning like a sincere belief or gentleness or sincerity. It's something deeper. And the literal meaning of contrite comes from the Latin, which means to crush, I believe. And so that's why it says literally worn or bruised. So it's a lot more of a violent term, if I may use that description. I mean, it's not like just this simple like, oh, I have a desire to serve God and I'm trying to be sincere. That's enough. It actually refers to something a little bit more intense. And so his spirit's contrite refers to our spirit, our self, our identity, that's who our spirit is, being broken, being crushed. And what's that crushing coming from? It's having our identity crushed so then that we can receive God's spirit, which will then reshape our identity to following God. And it's in that process we're humbled because we then suffer an ego death, as you would say. We suffer the death of self. And in doing so, we then, or you could say, in that process of suffering, in order to suffer the death of self, or we have to recognize our own weakness. It's just like the saints of King Benjamin, where they recognized that they were lower than the dust of the earth. And it was through that recognition that they were able to be regenerated. And so that's essentially what's going on with the contrite. And that's why the Lord said, an offer a broken heart and a contrite spirit. In order for us to be regenerated, to be born again, we have to have our will crushed so that then there can be made way, place for God's will to take over. Because Christ has talked about these ideas of two masters, right? You can't serve both masters. And we have the natural man, which is one master, and then we have God, which is the other master. And so essentially, in order to get to serve God, we have to kick the natural man, the old master, out of the house. or palace or whatever structure you want to use. And that's what's going on here with this language. That's kind of what's being conveyed. And then we have obedience. And also in verse 17, it clarifies more of what the Lord means by contrite, which is to tremble under my power. And that seems to be connected with the fear of the Lord. And we know that fear of the Lord is something, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're just afraid of the Lord, that he's going to strike us down, but it is more so of recognizing the ultimate power the Lord has and realizing that what we are doing when we come to the Lord is a serious thing, and that we do not treat the Lord lightly. And then that means when he tells us to do something, we do it. That means when he has given us greater knowledge, we treasure it. We treasure that by applying it, by learning from it, and by sharing it with others. And so that's how I've understood the fear of the Lord, is that we fear him in a way not of like the pagan gods. People feel the pagan gods, but more so of um, the recognition for his majesty and power and what that means in our life. And then the last thing we have is obedience. So those are the things. So one way to rephrase this, so we understand more, is those who are accepted by God are those who connect with God. So they receive revelation from God. That's what comes from connection. Who abhor sin, which comes from having the natural man pulverized, and are obedient to God. So notice that the Lord does not say those who are in positions of authority are of God. He does not say trust on Joseph Smith. And he does not say just stay in the church and then you'll know who is following and accepted of God and who's not. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that just because you have a position of authority in the church, you're not of God. What I am saying, though, is authority in a position of authority doesn't necessarily make you accepted of God. And we have seen this in other places and other institutions. And there are instances of even church leaders who have fallen into sin. And I'm aware of people who, around my own neighborhood where I live, of some bishops who were arrested for very criminal activities. And I won't go into detail, but they were bishops and they were arrested, maybe former bishops. But in any case, they had a position of authority and that didn't mean anything. And so what I'm getting at, well, I guess the question is why? So why doesn't the Lord do that? Well, I think I kind of showed the example is authority doesn't necessarily mean your status, right? Um, and even though it would be easier for that, the problem is it just simply can't be done. Why? Why can't the Lord just tell us simply, just follow this person, you'll be good? Well, one problem is when we do that, we are then giving up our agency to some person. And that, if Satan's able to corrupt that person that we so called trust in, and I don't have this in my notes, but this is coming to my mind as a clarification. If we put our trust in that person and they become corrupted, then we can fall as well. And so, and there's no guarantee that any man can remain uncorrupted. It's possible. I'm not saying that men can't. I'm just saying that anyone in a high position can fall. And the Lord told Joseph Smith that. He said, be careful or you're going to fall. So if Joseph Smith could fall, anyone can fall. And we also have seen that through Scripture with David. I mean, David was a tremendously righteous man, and he fell. He slipped. Even Solomon. Solomon had tremendous amounts of wisdom and was known for his wisdom and applied that wisdom. And people came from across the known world to receive his wisdom, and he fell. And so there is that danger when we put our faith in just one man who is not the Lord, we are possibly led to falling. And we're giving over our agency to them. And if Satan can corrupt that person, then we are in a very dangerous position to being deceived, because we'll just follow whatever that person says because we've put full trust. And Joseph Smith warned the church members about it, and he told them that their reliance on him was causing their minds to be darkened because they were shifting the ability of reason and of acquiring light onto him, and they were not able to receive more light and instead receive darkness. So that's a little side note. But another thing to understand is that what is good is too great to package into a simple heuristic. And that's exactly what Mormon in Moroni 7 is doing with the members of the church, is he is sharing the way that we can find the good. And it's not just simply, 10 things or a list. It is, the good is so hard to fully describe. It can only be achieved through experience and through revelation, and without that we won't really fully understand the good. And the reason too is the good depends on certain circumstances. What is good for one person one time might be different for a person somewhere else. I mean, you can think of an example of someone who cake. Let's just say someone who likes to eat cake. If someone is fit and they're in good shape, then cake is probably not a bad thing to eat. But if someone's overweight and maybe diabetic, cake is, well, I guess it depends. If you're diabetic, you might need the cake. But let's just say if someone's overweight or they have health issues, cake might not be the thing to eat, or chips or something like that. And so it is dependent on the circumstances, and that requires a level of discernment that is not readily just available through a simple list. The other thing is that God's goodness is so separate from our conception, and our conception is bounded in our fallen world, that we have to be slowly shown more and more of what the good is. And so how does this all connect is that being a follower of God is not about an outward appearance, but is about the fruit that comes forth. And when we are fruitful, then we align with God. And so the reason why the Lord provided those things is because, and these things referring to here, is because those are the things that will allow us to produce fruit. And it is by producing fruit that we align with God. Because fruit means to produce goodness. And goodness is that which profits, it's that which benefits others. And so when it comes to producing fruit, it's not necessarily just about going out and doing missionary work, but it's about an overall existence where your life benefits others. Just by your existence being in their life, you're able to see how their lives can improve, and then you're able to provide that level of incremental growth to that person, and thereby allowing them to grow. And you have fruit because you're able to then share that. You're able to give them of your fruit so that they can then be benefited by it. And there's a whole deeper concept about that when it comes to the tree of life and how we partake of God's goodness. But I won't get in that. And so this kind of ties in to this idea of giving fruit, because he's then in verse 16 kind of clarifies, and he says, "He that speaks, whose spirit is contrite, and whose language is meek and edifieth, the same is of God if you obey my ordinances." And so again, the purpose of God's and what he's doing with us and how we are accepted of him is that God cares less about the outward appearance or our pedigree. And what matters to God is our ability to, well, first our heart, our desire to serve him, and then our ability to replicate or to generate goodness into the world. And so when it comes to finding true messengers of God, the important thing is to look at the fruit that they produce and look at how they receive truth, how they teach it, their submission to God, and then their ability to then share that with others and what they do when they are around. So what this means is that someone who could appear offensive might actually be from God if what they are sharing is beneficial. And the way you know that is by testing it, tasting, trying the fruit. By their fruits you shall know them, and seeing whether the fruit they have to share is actually fruit that is beneficial. And sometimes you just have to test. You have to be willing to try it, to see what comes from it. And if something good comes from it, if you become better, if you found a way to overcome a challenge that you weren't able to overcome before, then that is a sign that this person has fruit from God. Now, do they have all of it? Well, you have to keep going and seeing, but you keep testing, you keep picking from their fruit and seeing whether that fruit continues, a tree they producing continues to produce more and more fruit, and that fruit is continuing to improve. Also, another way is to see how their lives reflect God and how their lives are and how they respond to challenges, how they respond to life. Are they able to overcome the world? Are they being overcome by it? When they face challenges, are they showing grit and resilience, showing therefore they've adopted more of the character of God because God cannot be overcome? He overcomes all things. Or are they easily discouraged when challenges arise? Because you will find in the scriptures of men of God, those who were approved of God, who were contrite, who edified and provided fruit, didn't waver in their faith because they knew and they were taught and they know the principles for how to overcome. And so, as we go for this week and as we read Doctrine and Covenants, think about the people in your life. Identify those who you see are different, who are distinct, who have something to share, who seem to be doing things better than you can, and reach out to them. And they might seem like they might not have a lot. I mean, that's the thing, is sometimes it might not be readily apparent. And they might be a little rough on other edges, but if they have some way to make you improve, then they have fruit for that period, and that will further lead you to finding those who are accepted of God, and then that you can follow, that you can hearken, that you can listen to, and become better.